And the great Mike Milbury joins us on the Harbor One Hotline. Good morning, Mike. How are you?
Good morning, guys. How you doing?
We're doing all right. I conquered Noro. Greg is suffering from an unknown potential bird flu. He's out today. And Elliot Friedman there, Wiggy, and I sort of co-signed, but Wiggy was at the front of the conversation regarding the Bruins' need to trade Ullmark to fill some needs in order to get this team cup ready. What's your reaction to their attempts at trading him, and how do you think that impacts the team going forward?
They were stuck when they gave him a 16-team no-trade clause, and I mean we've all heard the rumors, and Elliott just said things like an Eastern Conference team. I heard LA was involved. I heard last year was Winnipeg, but it all amounts to nothing. His clause evaporates, I believe, over the summer sometime. I would expect, if the rumors that Elliott listed and I've heard are true, that somebody will come knocking on the door this summertime and that trade will happen. And it's been looming for a long time. There just is no room for two number one goaltenders. And I guess I'm going to be very curious to see if they rotate them when the playoffs start. But I think ultimately that one of these guys is going to be shown the door, and more than likely it's going to be Ullmark.
Why did they get into this predicament? Why allow it to get to this point where you're basically forced to trade him?
When a guy's a totally free agent, as Ullmark was, you can ask for certain things, and if the need of the team that's knocking on your door is great enough, they may yield to it, and that's the case with Ullmark. He was a completely free agent. The Bruins didn't have anybody that was standing out in the number one position. They obviously liked Ullmark, and they yielded on his request to have certain teams out of the loop. And now it's come back to haunt him a little bit, because they could have used some help at the deadline here, and they're not going to get it, or at least they're getting marginal help with Maroon and the defenseman they picked up. But it would have been a considerably bigger splash, I would think, if Ullmark were moved.
Mike, you kind of touched on it a little bit as far as potential goalie rotation in the playoffs, but doesn't it kind of show that if they were trying to trade Ullmark, they believe that Swayman is the number one guy, and that come playoff time, Swayman is going to be the guy in that, unless the wheels just happen to fall off?
The winds seem to be blowing in that direction. I mean, if they tried to trade him, and there was talk of Swayman, maybe getting an extension, those are indications that they've determined that Swayman is going to be the number one guy, and they're not going to be able to pay two number one guys. But now that they have them for right now, it'll be up to Montgomery to see which way he goes with it. I mean, he knows last year that he went with Ullmark for too long, and it bit him, put Swayman in a terrible position. But does he go back to this rotation that he did during the regular season, or will he go with what other people consider to be the better philosophy, with a hot hand?
Mike, you bring up the defenseman, the newly acquired defenseman, Andrew Peeke. He's set to make his debut tonight. And don't you think that has been an issue all season long, though, when it comes to the defenseman on this team?
Yeah, I do, Courtney. I think there's the biggest thing that's been bugging them and keeping them from being consistent is the lack of discipline. They've blown late leads consistently. They take too many penalties consistently, and their turnovers are hurting them desperately in the wrong situations at the wrong time of the game. So they've got to clean that up. A lot of that's simply on them, and we'll see with these new additions. I don't know when Maroon finally gets back into the lineup, but he's not exactly fleet of foot, but he can get into the trenches, and he knows how to get the little things done and play with the kind of discipline that's earned him 3 Stanley Cups over the last 4 or 5 years.
You just listed off so many things that this team seems to have an issue with, though. Doesn't that seem like they're trying to find a consistency to be playing well, and it's a crucial time to figure that out before the postseason? Does that fall on Montgomery, or does that fall on the players?
Well, obviously both of them have to be somewhat responsible, but when it comes to discipline, the coach has got to bear the brunt of the responsibility. It's got to be on him to insist that he gets the right kind of decision making. He talked about it today in the newspaper about game management. Their game management, that's just decision making. And, there has to be a penalty for turning the puck over just inside your blue line. There's got to be a penalty for taking a stupid penalty in a late stage of the game, and making sure that you have the sort of structure that you need in the defensive zone to hang on to those leads. None of those are very good signs for them going into the playoffs. That leaves them quite vulnerable, but they are Jekyll and Hyde, so we'll see what happens. I mean, a lot of questions and a lot of questions about who they might match up with at the end of the Final Eight in the Eastern Conference. So it'll be pretty entertaining to watch this play out over the next 15 games.
Mike, just your what you would rather. Would you rather go all in, win a cup, and then kind of suck as a GM, or would you rather what Sweeney's built here, constantly contending near the top of the NHL every regular season and close but no cigar on winning it all?
My first 3 years, we played the Canadiens and lost twice in the finals, once in the semifinals with that too many men on the ice game. If you're asking me as a player, I want to win the damn thing once or twice, or maybe it's only once. But if you have that's the whole goal, isn't it? The whole goal is to win it. It's not to just hang around and be competitive. And I don't think that Don Sweeney wants to do that, but that's the world that he's living in right now. They've been close, but not good enough to get it over the hump. And, if you could, and it sounds like if he was willing to trade Ullmark, it sounds like he was willing to take a stab at it this time around. But, circumstances being what they were, he was unable to get the job done. But for me, win it once and then figure out what you got to do next.
Mike, I remember I asked Alex Cora this down in Fort Myers, kind of about not necessarily discipline, but understanding game time, decision making. And he said it's difficult to do in baseball because they play almost every night. And in football, I come from the world where you play one and then you're able to work on things. And so when that situation arises again, you make the best decision. In hockey, what is that like? Is it similar to where it's very difficult to work on situational things because you don't have as much practice time, and the film study is not as much as it is in football? Or is it you have the time and it's just these guys are not aware of what the situation is?
There is so little time. I saw an article that Brian Burke, formerly manager in this league and an executive in this league, talked about reducing the number of games to about 70, which I think is commonsensical. There's so much travel with the Bruins schedule. It's almost impossible to get quality practice time in. But that doesn't mean you can't work on it in terms of reviewing tape and going over that stuff. There's plenty of time for that. It's just the actual physical doing of certain things in certain situations in practice is not very practical because they just don't have the time for it. I mean, their schedule is crammed up so much that it's hard to even get a good day's rest. So, I think you can't excuse it. You have to deal with it. If there are problems, you have to fix them. If you don't have the actual practice time, or you don't want to push your players to be on the ice for 6 days in a row when there's travel and all that other stuff, you've got to find a different way to do it, whether it's walkthroughs or videotape or just a skull session with each of those guys. That's what the coach is there for. He's there to enforce the rules that he sets that he thinks will make the team most successful. And if you don't have the good practice time, and they don't very often, you've got to find it another way. You've got to get to them in a different direction.
How much film study do you guys have in the NHL? Because in football, we feel like, it's almost like we feel like we watch so much film because we do have a lot of time. How much film study is there that guys can really take advantage of in the NHL?
You see it on the bench now. They have pads. They can go right back and look at what happened in a particular play. There's so much more access than I had when I was a coach or a player. But And they have so many more coaches available to break down tape. I mean, each of these teams, I think the Bruins have 2 video coordinators that are, I'm sure, at the beck and call of each of the coaches to break down certainly the special teams and power play, penalty kill, but also defensive zone situations, late game situations, turnovers, all that stuff can go into neat little packets that take a fraction of the time it once did to look at tape. So it's hugely important in the game today.
All right, Mike, before we let you go, thoughts on Kate Middleton? What's going on?
I don't know what is going on with Kate Middleton. I was just talking about with my wife. It seems a little weird. I hope it's okay, but it's starting to sound a little sketchy, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, keep your eyes peeled. We want to hear your latest next week. But have a great week,
All
Mike.
right, I'll give the Prince a call and see what's going on.
Hey, I mean, if anybody can do it, you can, Mike. We'll talk to you next week.